Hello, I'm Charles from Charles N Photography. Today we're going to be editing a motion time-lapse that I actually photographed just around a month ago at the Pine River on the north side of Brisbane. Now, if you want to see video of how I took this time-lapse, I'm actually just showing it here, but it'll be at the end of this video. The difference between the editing of this time-lapse compared to the last time-lapse that I done, the last time-lapse that I uploaded and I edited was a still time-lapse, which meant that there wasn't any motion or any panning of the camera. This time-lapse at the Pine River, we actually tracked as the morning sun moved around, and we tracked for nearly an hour. Today we're going to be using Adobe Lightroom CC Classic in conjunction with LRTimelapse, which is one of the best time-lapse editing programs that you can get. You can use it for free for up to 400 photos. Once you exceed that 400 photo limit, you would then have to go and pay for the use of the program. It's not that much, and I definitely recommend this program and purchasing it to help the developer. The beauty about LRTimelapse is that you can actually put as many keyframes as you like. So as the time-lapse is moving along, if it gets brighter or darker, or if clouds come in, or if you're going from, let's say, a late afternoon to sunset to twilight to night, you can actually set keyframes to actually adjust so that the photos aren't spiking. They're not going from bright to dark to bright again. You can actually level off all this using the combination of Adobe Lightroom and LRTimelapse. Now all the keyframes are set up in LRTimelapse, and then once we've actually set up all the keyframes, we bring it into Adobe Lightroom. All my photos are in Adobe Lightroom. Now I haven't done any editing because first I have to populate the time-lapse in LRTimelapse. This is what we're going to do first. So let's dive in. Now you can see these are all my photos that I shot on the day. There is 411 photos. They were taken at 11 mils, at 1/200th of a second, at f10 and ISO 100. Now, if we open up LRTimelapse, this is LRTimelapse in front here. Now what we have to do is, I have catalogs here, and this is my time-lapse for clouds and storm photography. So I scroll down and this is the one I want. So the 14th of March 2020. So I click on it. Now you can see that it's actually populating all the images on the right. You can see up the top here, loading EXIF data. So depending on how big your time-lapse is, depending the length of time that it takes this. Now understand that using these two programs together does load up your PC or laptop, so you be prepared to be here for a little bit of time. So you can see on our left here now, you can see a little bluish squiggly line. It's actually mapping out our exposures and all that for the whole time-lapse. That's it. So you can see, like, this is basically the center. So it starts off being a bit bright and it goes down a bit. So now we can actually load in, it's called the keyframe wizard. So we click on keyframe wizard. It's telling us that 3 frames, actually 2 frames. Now here we can load as many keyframes as we like, and I will show you how I do it. So you can see that there's one at the start and one at the end. So I want to put a keyframe where there is a big change in the exposure. So we'll start off, we can just slide the slider along, and you can see as I'm sliding it, below the picture here, this little blue arrow. See, there's one here, so we'll click on this one. Down on the bottom right here, frame 28, and you can see I've actually put a keyframe there. Now, if I actually go back a little bit, this is quite bright here, so I'll actually put one there as well. So we slide along, and we'll come back to another bright one, frame 60. This one's quite bright as well, so we'll click on it. And we slide back until we get to neutral again. We click on it. Now, See, it's actually getting quite dark down here. So I'll get to the darkest point first, click it back. Now I'll get back to about halfway, click on it, so that now we'll come down here. Now we're halfway along here, so we'll click on another keyframe. This will be another one. So you can see what I'm doing now. I'm actually, as it's moving around, I'm actually putting a keyframe. You can put as many keyframes you like. The more keyframes you put in, the longer it will take you to edit through Adobe Lightroom and through LRTimelapse. If there's only, let's say, 4 or 5 keyframes, the editing process goes very quickly. But if you put 50 keyframes, that means that Lightroom has to edit 50 keyframes, and then Timelapse LRT has to render those 50 keyframes and blend them in. But if you've got a very big discrepancy everywhere with light fading in and out, then you put as many keyframes as needed. Okay, so we go along a little bit more. Now it gets a bit dark here just because the sun was being hidden by clouds. So we'll get halfway up here, we'll put a keyframe, we get to the top, put a keyframe, and then all we do is we'll get halfway, about halfway, that's it. That's it. So now we have all our keyframes. Now what we have to do is say save this. So we come up here and it says save changes to XMP metadata. So you can see here that it's saving it. So this is actually writing to the metadata of your files. Now you can shoot in JPEG if you want, but really when you're doing these time lapses, you are much better off shooting in RAW format. Now the next process, it says drag to Lightroom. Now if I highlight this, it says drag this button to Lightroom library, but below it, it says if the sequence is already in Lightroom, set the filter to LRT5 full sequence, go to the grid view, select all, then say meta read metadata from files. And this is what we're going to do now. So my photos are already in Lightroom, so I don't have to drag that button. So now I just go into Lightroom. But before we go into Lightroom, LRTimelapse has already previewed my time lapse as it looks at the moment. So if we just click here on the camera preview, you can actually see this is what it looks like. And you can see that during the video there is some bright and dark areas. So this is what we're going to try to make as smooth a transition as possible. So now we go into Lightroom. So here are my photos. So I'll just make my thumbnails very small to save me a lot of scrolling. So I select all my photos and I come up here to metadata and it says read metadata from files. And it says this will overwrite the metadata. We go yes, we want to read from file. So this is actually now going to be reading the updated metadata that LRTimelapse added to all our keyframes. And you can see in the top left corner it's saying reading XMP metadata. I'll unhighlight so you can actually see. I'll make the thumbnails a little bit bigger. And you can see there are some files now. See, number 1 has got a 4-star. Then we come up, number 11's got a 4-star. All the images with a 4-star rating are our keyframes. We only want to be editing the keyframes. We don't want to be touching any of the other files because these are not going to be updated in LRTimelapse at this stage. So now we click up here and we hear the full sequence. Now all we want is the keyframes. It's showing us we have 15 keyframes. Now we'll make the thumbnails a little bit bigger. Okay, so here's our 15 keyframes. So now we go into the library module. We select the first image. I could just come up here on the left to my Takina profile, but to those who have never used a profile before, they are quite easy to do. You can actually make them. All you have to do is up on the presets here, you click add and you can create your own profile. But before you can create a profile, you've actually got to select one in your lens correction tools. So we come down here on the right to lens correction. And you can see here we have either manual or profile. And if I click profile, I click first off, I always click remove chromatic aberration. Then I click enable profile correction. Now it shows me here automatically that I'm using a Tachyna lens, and it is an 11 to 20mm f2.8 Pro DX lens. All the major lens manufacturers, Nikon, Canon, Sony, Pentax, Sigma, Tachyna and others, whenever they bring out a new lens, they will send a profile of that lens to Adobe. And part of the Adobe system is whenever there's new lens profiles available, they'll make a very short update for all these profiles. Now you might think that there's a lot of problems, but for me, this lens here, the 11 to 20mm Tachyna lens, does have some problems. Well, not so much problems, but because it's such a wide angle lens, it has a bit of barrel distortion and pin cushion between 11mm and 20mm. If I wasn't using a profile, I would have to do all this by hand. Tachyna have made a profile, so all I have to do is click on the profile. All these little errors in the lens are automatically fixed. Now don't think it's just Tachyna. Nikon, Canon, they all have their own little errors in the lens. It's just part of a lens. The lenses that probably have the least amount of errors in are a prime lens. But even them, like I used to own a Rokinon 14mm f2.8 lens for Astro, which is the same type of lens as the Samyang 14mm. It was a great lens, but once I added the profile to it, it would actually stop the horizon from having a curve in it, which was a problem with that lens. You add the profile, the curve in the horizon becomes straight again. It pays to find, if you've got a lens, add the profile to it. Let's start editing our photo. So now we come up to basic. Now before we even start here, we have to crop our image. Remember that we're doing a time-lapse movie. When we render these, a movie is shot in 16:9 format. So we actually have to crop our image to a 16:9 format. So we come over here and we select the 16:9. Most of the time in landscape we say that we try to put the horizon 1/3 from the bottom. But if you see here, I've actually cut off all the leftover of the old Hornibrook Bridge. If I bring it all the way down the bottom here, what I've done is taken out all this, most of the sky. So actually sort of we'll split it 50-50. We can see that this pylon here just hits the water about here. So we'll select it there. So we'll have quite a bit of sky, but we'll still see the leftover of the old Hornibrook Bridge. We click done. Now we start exposing our image. The exposure looks very good. Now we'll look at the white balance. If we select auto, that's too warm. So we'll choose the color picker down here. Remember that this color picker, basically, it's not, I call it a color picker, but it's a white balance picker. If we move across the image, if we look up into the top left-hand corner down here to our navigator, see if I move over to the blues, our image becomes very orangey. If I move over to the whites, it looks more natural, because when you're using this picker, you're actually telling it that where you've selected the picker is neutral grey. Most of the time in just about any photo, you will find an area where there is neutral grey. So I'll come down here to the clouds. Now you can see here the clouds here are fairly grey, but it's a bit dark. We'll come up a little bit lighter. Okay, we'll click on that. That looks fairly good. So it's showing it's 5,700, which looks very good. We also have to adjust our color profile. You can see here we have Adobe Color, Adobe Landscape, Portrait, Standard and Vivid. When I'm shooting wildlife, I'm always shooting in Adobe Color. It's not a flat profile, but it doesn't give it too much vibrance. It doesn't sort of add too much saturation and vibrance to the image. But in my landscape photos, I actually want a bit of that. So I prefer using Adobe Landscape. If you choose Adobe Vivid, you're actually going to be punching up those colors a bit more, because as the profile states, it's vivid color. If you're shooting in JPEG, then set your camera to a vivid profile for your landscape photos, and they'll add a little bit of punch. We'll select Adobe Landscape. Like I said before, all this sort of photography, you should be shooting in RAW. If you shoot in JPEG, you're actually limiting the amount of editing you can do. Yes, you can shoot in JPEG, but why spend all this time shooting a time-lapse just for it to be in JPEG? It's much better off shooting in RAW and getting the most out of your time-lapse as you can. Now we've selected our color profile, we've selected our white balance, we come up here to the exposure. Now the exposure looks very good. So now we're going to edit the highlights, shadows, whites and blacks. It's actually, you're much better off starting with blacks, because if you set your blacks that you haven't clipped, you'll find that all the rest of them will be much easier to edit. We use the Alt key, we press it down, and then as soon as we touch the slider for the black, it goes to a white screen. Now if I go to the left of the blacks, you can see there's heaps of color there. That's showing me that blacks are clipped. So we keep sliding until we don't see any color at all. That's it. Now we do the same for whites, and whites is the opposite. Whites, we want a black screen. So if I shoot over to the right, you can see well overexposed. We come back. Now I'm not going to go too far to the left here, because I can also control the whites with my highlights. And I can see here that there's still a couple of little dots down the bottom, so I'll just bring them back down. Now, it's showing me that I'm at -64 in the highlights. I will show you what happens if I actually bring it a little bit further down and watch the clouds up here. Now, if I go to the right, can you see that we've lost definition in the clouds? If I come all the way down, I can go down to -100. Can you see that we've actually gotten a bit more detail in the clouds? Now, if you're using the Alt key and the slider, if it's not clouds that you're worried about, it's fine to do that. But I find for clouds, it'll tell you that your highlights are not clipped and that the image is correctly exposed. There won't be a lot of definition in the clouds. So moving the slider more to the left, you'll actually get a bit more definition in those clouds. And this is what I want. Now I'll just up the shadows, just that fraction. We can just see a little bit of the bridge here. So I'm very happy with that. Now we come up to dehaze, clarity and texture. Now I don't add any texture because I don't want sort of any grittiness in my photo. All I will add is clarity and dehaze. So I'll just add a little bit of clarity. Now the dehaze here, we have to be very careful, because if it was a single image, we could edit correctly like this. We can hit the Alt key and slide to the right until we start seeing color. There. 24. This is going to be a movie, so you've got to be very careful not to add too much dehaze for your image not to be too outlined, or else when it goes through the movie, it'll will be jittering along. The clouds will have too much sharpness on the edges. So we'll just reduce the dehaze slightly to about 19. Now vibrance and saturation, this is basically something that the user likes. I don't add too much vibrance or saturation. The one thing that I tell people you have to be careful of when you're using vibrance and saturation is that your vibrance never exceeds the percentage value of your saturation, because vibrance only works in your primary colors. If you, for example, if we come over here and we saturate the photo by, let's say, 24, and this is how I normally like having it, around 24 with a vibrance of 17. Now that looks pretty good, but watch what happens to the blue up here if we go above the 24. Can you see how the blues, we've actually gone well exceed, but what's happened is the blues have actually changed not only their density, their color density, the way the blue actually looks. It's actually not the blue that we like. This is the blue that I like. It's a bit flat, it's a very realistic color. So remember not to increase the vibrance more than the saturation. We quite like this. Now we can go into the detail. Now because this was shot in daytime at ISO 100, there won't be any noise. So there's no need to add any noise reduction to the image. All we can do now is add a little bit of sharpening, and this is selective sharpening. Now in my wildlife photos, I actually add quite a lot of selective sharpening just to get the outline of the bird, the eyes and all that, to really make the photo pop. But like I just said, this is a movie, so if we add too much selective sharpening, it won't look realistic. But we can add just a little bit of selective sharpening, and this is how we do it. What we do is we hit the Alt key, and as soon as we start sliding the masking tool, can you see that we're starting, it's gone from a blank white image, and as we slide it to the right here, can you see how much black is coming in? Now all the black area here, there is no sharpening involved. So we come up here to about 50. Now the amount here of sharpening is only at 25, which is quite minimal. If you slid it up to 75, you would actually have very sharp outlines of the clouds and all that. I don't want that. So I'm very happy with that. And this is all that I do here. In a single landscape photo, I would actually adjust the perspective here, the transformation. You can see that the light poles aren't really straight, but if I adjust this to one photo, as it's going along, it will be wanting to adjust everything. That's out of the question. We don't use this tool. So we come up here back to the basic module. Now, the editing here is just about done. One thing you have to remember, some of these tools that you use here, LRTimelapse, really state that you cannot use, because in the process of adjusting, putting all the adjustments that we've done here in Lightroom into LRTimelapse, some of the adjustments will not be carried over to all the photos. So this is what we've got to be very mindful of. In the description of this video, I'll actually put a link to Gunther's YouTube video where he discusses which tools you can use and which you can't. I've already shown you the tools that I'm using. So if you just use these tools, you will be very safe. Something else here as well is up the top here in our develop panel, we have the spot removal tool, red eye, we have the grad filter, we have the radial filter, and the brush tool. Now, two tools we shouldn't use, the spot removal tool and the brush tool. The spot removal tool, if it was a fixed time lapse, there is no motion in there, that spot isn't going to go anywhere. You might be able to use it, but if you've got clouds coming in and out, then it will be noticeable. So I try not to use the spot removal tool or the brush tool, because the brush tool is not a tool that is transferred across all your images. The only two tools you can use are the grad tool and the radial filter tool. Here, LRTimelapse has actually given us pre-programmed tools. There is 4 grad filter placements and I think 2 radial filter tools. So now we'll go into the grad filter and we'll try to balance up this image a little bit more. So we click on the graduative filter tool and you can see here we have one down the bottom, one a little bit further up, and then we have 2 up the top here. One there and one here. Now, can you see the pink? This shows you where your filter tool is going to be affected. So once we click on it, this is the area of the photo that we'll be adjusting. But before I do the sky, I'm actually just going to lift a little bit of the shadows here. So bring up the grad filter. Now there's too much graduation here, so I'll actually reduce it down. I'll bring it up. Now to show you where I'm working on, there, you can see where I'm working. But if I leave the mask overlay on, I can't see the colors or the shadows. So I'll take it off. I'll just increase the exposure just slightly. That looks a little bit better. Now for me, the bottom here is a little bit too brown. The water was actually quite brown on this day, but to me it's a little bit too brown. So we'll actually cool it down a bit. So what we do is we reduce the temperature down here. We don't want much, just that little bit. That's okay. I'm pretty happy with that. I'll just click on this one here, the one from the top. I'll bring it down a little bit. I'll also reduce the graduation. And we can see here where the sky starts getting very bright. So we'll put it about there. And now I can actually reduce the highlights a little bit more to give it more depth in these clouds. The sky is very blue here. So I actually want to sort of desaturate that blue. So I have 2 ways. I can either use the desaturation tool or use the temperature tool and just warm the sky up a little bit. And by doing that, I'm actually going to add a little bit of warmth to those clouds, which will actually look quite good. So we'll just add a little bit of warmth to the cloud. It's too much. There, just by 4. That looks very good. Now, can you see right up the top here? This is actually quite dark. The reason being was when I shot this time lapse, I had a 3-stop ND medium grad filter on because there was so much difference in light between the sky and our foreground. So right up the top was actually quite dark. So now I'm actually just going to brighten the image up just up the top there. So I'll just bring this down a little bit. This one here will actually increase the graduation. And I'll just bring it down where I can see it starts going dark, which is about here. So now all I can do is just increase the light a little bit. There. That's it. I click done. Now I'm very happy with this image. It looks very good. If it was a single image, I could really go to town on this image, really give it some warmth. But when you're doing a time lapse, you've got to be very mindful of how much of the image you edit. You don't want to go overboard because when you're doing the video, it'll look ghastly. It just won't look lifelike. So now we select our 15 photos and we come up to script here and we say sync keyframes, and it will actually sync now our other 14 images to what we've done on the first photo. So you can see here it's syncing the keyframes and saying 14 photos that were targeted were synced. So we come back up here to library module. We'll make the thumbnails a little bit bigger so you can see a bit more better. So this is what it looks like now. Now if I run through each photo, what I'm doing here at the same time is I'm actually looking at the histogram to make sure that my photo isn't too dark. If it's a bit too dark, I can quickly just brighten it up a little bit, because remember that some of these were a bit dark and some were a bit bright. You can see some of these are a little bit dark, especially this one here. This one's dark too. Okay, so what I can come up here to do is I come back up to the first one and we can see where our histogram is. It's just a couple of mils from the right. So all I have to do is I go through here. This one's fairly close. This one's fairly close. Fairly close. We'll leave them. It's pretty close. Okay, we can see this one here, it's a little bit further out, so we just touch the exposure up just that little bit. This one's a bit dark too, so we'll just up it up a little bit. Now all the rest of these are a little bit dark as well, so to save a bit, we'll just take them all up slightly. We come back. What I've done here is I selected all the images because all the last images here from 9 to 15 slowly got darker. So by selecting them all and adjusting one, I'm actually slightly higher. So I won't have as much movement to do on some of these. Now, this one looks fairly close. Looks fairly close. Now, these last four here will just increase the exposure just a little bit. Too much. There. That's it. Now that looks much better. We go back up to our library module. Now we can see that all our photos look very similar. So now what we do is we select our 15 images, we go up here to metadata, and now we say save metadata to file. This is going to save all the work that we've done, all the editing, to our files. And once the metadata is saved, we will go back into LRT. So we click Save Metadata File. Now it's giving us a warning, the understanding that this is a no returns thing. So once we do this, we can't come back. So say continue. Okay, so it's saved it. Now we come back up to LRT time-lapse and we come up here to reload. Now what this does is it's going to reload all the metadata because it's changed now. Those 15 files have changed. So now it is adjusting all these files. So that's it, it's reloaded. Now we have to click on the next phase, which is auto transition. And it says here, create a keyframe based transition. So we click on it. Now you can see it's calculating the transitions, and what it's doing here, it's going to even up all the frames. So it's actually not just the keyframes, but it's calculating how much it actually has to adjust all our other frames between. So you can see here, you can see that it's actually, we've increased the exposures here more and more. Now it's done that. Now we come up here to a visual preview. So we click visual preview. Now it's working on a visual preview. So the visual previews take a bit of time. The longer the time lapse, the longer it takes. So you can see, like now this is the little pink line here and it's just starting. So it's showing visual previews 7%. Now these visual previews take a bit of time. So what I normally do is I either check emails or I go and watch a movie, have food or something like that, because if I've shot a time lapse with 1,000 images, it could take up to about 30 to 45 minutes just to do the visual previews. So it's just something that is part of this. So we're 50% into the visual previews, and you can see now that we've got this pinkish graph coming along. You can see it, it's just all over the place. This has to do with all our keyframes that we've edited, and what it's doing, it is trying to even out all the exposures, and this is why it takes a bit longer. This is why at the start of the video I said that the more keyframes you put in, the longer it takes to edit. If we only had 3 keyframes, one at the start, one in the middle and one at the end, this visual previews would go very quickly because it jumps from 1 to 3 to the end. So, and this is what I said at the start, if you've only got 3 keyframes, it goes from the start to the middle to the end very quickly. But the more keyframes you put in, the longer it has to read all the files and then even out all the exposures for your time lapse. Now if we look down here below our slideshow, down here where it says at the point of a time lapse, we can see here that there's 417 files. The first little box here that's green says that we've actually selected all our keyframes. The third one here, which is in green, it says the auto transition is done already. The next phase now is visual previews, and you can see in the one just above it, the one that says Clontarf, it shows auto transition was done, the visual previews were done, and the next one here is deflicker was also done. We still got 2 stages to go. Now we're at 80%, and can you see how the graph has changed? Look at that. So now it's actually coming right up. That's it. Our visual previews are finished. So it's taken around 10 minutes to do these visual previews. Now we can actually click on the play button and see what our time lapse actually looks like now with all the editing we've done. So we come down here to the left and we click on play the time lapse. That looks great. So now the last thing we have to do is just add a little bit of deflicker. What deflicker does is that because the camera is just taking photo after photo, there's always a little bit of lag between the photos, and the deflicker will stop this, so it'll actually just smooth out between the photos. This is one thing that Lightroom cannot do. You can add a time lapse in Adobe Lightroom CC. I'll put a link at the end of this video on one of these time lapses that I've done, but Lightroom cannot deflicker your photos, so all it does is just join up all the photos into a video, whereas with LRT time-lapse it deflickers them, because imagine that if you're using the camera and you're pressing it down very quickly, the mirror slap going up and down, so you end up, this is called a bit of flicker. So with deflicker, this actually stops it all. So we click on visual deflicker. Here we have soothing and accuracy. There's not a lot of deflicker here, so we can just leave it on default. If we could actually visually see, like flicker through the photos, then we could say add more. At 10, I'm very happy with that. So if we click on apply, now you can see it's saving, so it's actually just saving the deflicker, and now it will have to redo the transitions, and we'll actually see, there it is. Can you see it there? It's just drawing itself a little green curve, because you could see the pink line was all like little squiggles. So now all that's doing is just smoothing out those squiggles, and now it has to rebuild the visual previews that we did. And because we only selected a scale of 10, the visual previews should go fairly quickly. We're already at 20, and you can see here, see it's actually starting to build the visual luminance, which is our deflicker. So it's working along, and if we see here, see we've got here the interval. This is very accurate. I'd actually set for an interval of 5, but sometimes the camera was doing a 5.1 seconds, sometimes it was 4.9. It shows you like just how accurate this program is. And it shows our aperture was f10, our shutter speed was 1/200, the ISO was 100, and this is the width in pixels of our image. My camera, the Nikon D7500, is a crop sensor. If I was shooting with a full frame camera, instead of 5600 by 3728, it would actually show 6000 by 4000. This is where we basically get the saying, it's a 6x4 image. If you're shooting with an APS, which is a crop sensor camera, those pixels will be reduced, but if you print them, they'll still print out to 6x4. Now while we're waiting, I've actually just brought up a time lapse that I did quite a while ago. This was shot on the other side of the Pine River, on the Redcliffe side of a sunset. I called it the sunset in motion. This was shot in September 2017, and shows you why it is so good working with Lightroom and LRT time-lapse to produce amazing time lapses. So I'll just play the video here. It goes for about 50 seconds. So you can see we're actually panning from the left towards the right. Now sun's gone down. Now I've actually reset the Genie Mini, which I used to pan, and now it's actually going to come back across at twilight towards the bridge. You can see there's a lot of people moving around. Having people sometimes in time-lapse is actually quite good. Now it stops here, and it just gradually gets, the sky just gets darker. So that's it. Our preview is done. Now you can see the pink line. This is our visual previews and the transition. Now can you see how smooth it is? Before it was very jagged. Now with this deflicker, it's actually smoothed it out quite nice. Now let's see what it looks like. We smooth it out. Look at that, the sky is much smoother. That looks great. So now we have to bring these settings back into Lightroom. So all we do, if we click up here to render video, it says Lightroom users, read metadata in Lightroom, then export the video. We come back into Lightroom. What we have to do is bring back small thumbnails. Now what we need to do is we have to click on the full sequence. If we don't click on the full sequence when we're saying read metadata, it's only going to adjust these 15 photos. We don't want it to just adjust the 15 photos. We want it to adjust the 411 photos that we have in our time lapse. So we click on full sequence, we click on the first image, and we scroll down, we click on the last image. Now we come up here to metadata and we say read. It says this will overwrite. Like last time, you have to understand this is a one-way trip. So we say read the metadata. Now this will take a little bit of time. There's 411 photos here. And if I make them a little bit bigger, you can see some of these photos haven't been edited yet. And scroll down where they haven't. You can see these haven't been edited. But watch what happens. Can you see now that we're gone from 6x4 to 16:9 and the photos are getting edited? Now I'll bring it back to small so I can actually see when I get to the end. I cannot export the files until they all have had their previews read. Now before we export, what happens is when we install LRTimelapse, it actually adds the plugin into Lightroom. This is why we've been able to do this, but it also gives us some export settings. Now LRTimelapse comes in two versions. We have the standard version and the Pro version. The Pro version allows us to save our files into a TIFF format, which means that the video can be a higher quality. I just save it in JPEG, and even on our 65-inch TV, they play out very nicely. So we keep scrolling down until they're all rendered. We're up to like 200, so we're about halfway there. Now what I do tell people is when you're doing this sort of work, try not to have any other applications going, because the more your computer's doing in the background, the slower all this will happen. Editing photos, rendering photos, and all that rendering video does take a lot out of your processor on the computer and RAM. So like try and have as least amount of things running in the background as possible. That's it. Now I've already selected file number 1. If I hold the shift key, select the last file, they're all selected. Now I can go up to File, Export. Now we can see up here on the left, we actually have LRTimelapse. So we click on it down. So we have LRT JPEG 4K or LRT Original. So I click on LRT JPEG 4K. Okay, so we choose an output path. So we say select. Now it's actually under here. Now I'll click new folder and I'll call it JPEG space time-lapse. Okay, so that's a folder that all my JPEG photos are going to be stored in, because the JPEGs is actually what's going to make the movie. So once it's actually saved, the 411 photos, we can open up LRTimelapse again and actually render the movie. So it'll actually grab all our edited JPEGs and make them into a movie. So see here we have resolution, we have 4K UHD, 4K, 6K, 8K or original. 4K is enough. Now you can see if we wanted the TIFF format, we have to have LRT Pro, or the 16-bit, we have to have LRT. So JPEG in 8-bit is heaps. We don't have to worry about this. This is just saying where the program is. And now we just hit export. So it's saying prepare to export. It's checking the sequence. That's it. See up on the top left, it's exporting 411 photos. So as you can see here, it's exporting 411 photos. So this will take a while and we'll come back when all the files have been saved. So it took about 40 minutes for the 411 photos to be saved on my computer. Now we will open up LRTimelapse and we'll render the video. So we go into LRTimelapse. Now this pop-up screen has come along and saying render the video. It's showing the output file, the file name, and all it does here is just grab the folder name and then it tells you what you're going to be editing. So this one says in 1080p at 29 frames per second. What I do want, I've got to come down here and modify. So the codec will always be MP4. Now the output size here, you can see that LRTimelapse has selected 1080p. Now we could select 4K UHD or 4K. All my videos are edited in 4K UHD. This is the file size from my mobile phone that I'm recording this video on. So I should just select 4K UHD. I could select the full 4K and all it would do was just resample down to 4K UHD when I actually compiled the whole video. So it's not a big problem. For this one, I'll actually just choose 4K and the frame rate will be 30 frames per second. So we have 29.97 or 30. We'll click at 30. The speed is default here. You can see here when we drop down the pop down screen, we have 1/8, 1/4, half, or 2 times, 4 times, 8 times, or 16 times the speed. If the video goes too fast for you, you could actually slow it down. If it's going not fast enough, you could actually speed it up. This is very good. When I do my Milky Way shoot sometimes the Milky Way just moves too quickly across the sky. So I might come down at half speed so that instead of just like a 10-second video, which just the Milky Way moving very quickly, I'll select it at half speed and it'll give me about a 30-second video and the Milky Way will just move much slower across the sky. You have to be careful if you're slowing a video down though, because if you slow it down too much, you'll actually notice it'll be stuttering along. If you speed it up too quickly, it'll actually move too quick. So now, warning, rendering outside MP4, you might get artifacts, older programs may not be able. This is just giving me a warning that I'm rendering at such a high definition that I could have problems. But I know I'm not going to have problems, so I'll leave it alone. So the quality down here, under the speed, we have low, medium, high, very high, or ultra high. I find that depending on what I choose, it's either high or very high. Actually, I've changed my mind. Instead of going to the 4K, I'll just select 4K UHD. Now see how the warning has gone away? And I'll just choose high because this is actually just for YouTube as an example. There's nothing really spectacular about this time lapse. If it was this beautiful sunset to twilight to night time lapse, then I would actually render it in a much higher quality. But this is still quite good. We'll do it at this rate first. Color sampling, now it's selected at 420. All the others are grayed out. The reason being is you can only choose grayed out versions if you have the Pro version. So everything else is right. So now we will click on render the video. Now, while it's rendering, what I'll actually do is I'll come back and we'll re-render at high specification. So we'll actually re-render at true 4K and very high quality. So this will actually give us a bigger file size. It might just take a little bit longer to render. On a PC, you will not notice any difference, believe me, between even 1080p, 4K, UHD and 4K, you won't notice much difference. I've got a 32-inch screen here, so I may notice a bit of difference between 1080p and UHD 4K, but between 4K UHD and 4K, I won't notice any difference. You'd have to be on a TV of at least 65-inch or more to actually see the difference. So it's about knowing your targeted audience. If you're going to be thinking that I want these to be displayed on large screens and like that, then by all means choose the highest resolution that you want. But if it's only going to be shown on YouTube or things like that, then 4K UHD, UDH is all that you need. All these go up on YouTube and I watch YouTube videos even at 1080p on our 65-inch TV. They play quite well. Sure, when I'm watching a 4K video, you can actually see a little bit more definition, but most of the time, most people won't really notice it. So we can see down the bottom here, it's actually rendering. We're around, it's saying it's up to frame 170 of 412. That's it. The video is just about rendered. Now Windows Explorer will pop up. Okay, there's our video. Open it up. As you can see, it looks very nice and it looks very natural. Now I will go back and I will re-render the same video in true 4K in LRT time-lapse. We go up to File and we say Render Video. Now, instead of 4K UHD, we click on 4K, still leave it on the high, and then we click Render. And it's still got a little bit to go. That's it, it's rendered the time-lapse in true 4K. Now Windows Explorer will just pop up and we'll be able to watch the video. Okay, there it is. Now if we just come back here to the file name, you'll actually see the difference. So you can see this was our first one here, 4K UHD at 30 frames in high quality, and it was 365 megabytes. The next one, which is in true 4K, 520. So close to an extra 150 megabytes in file size. Now let's play it. So that's it. So now the two of them have been rendered. I'll actually play them now on this timeline. The first one will be the one that was rendered in 4K UHD, and the second one in true 4K, and I'll actually just put the description down the bottom here and you'll actually see them run now. So this is the one in 4K UHD. And this is the one in true 4K. So now you've seen the three videos. Please understand that the one shot at 1080p, because I'm recording and rendering this video in 4K UHD, the 1080p will be upscaled. So it mightn't give a true comparison of what 1080p and 4K UHD looks like. But I will actually add in the description the three videos, the one at 1080p, the one in 4K UHD, and the one in 4K. So you can click on them individually and either watch them on your computer or smartphone or on your widescreen TV. Now, the one thing that I hadn't mentioned is when we've finished all this, you've done all your rendering and you're very happy with your video, you don't have to keep all the JPEG files that were written. For me, this is around 1.2 gigabytes of files that I don't need to keep. I never delete the raw files, because if I want to go back and edit the time-lapse a while later, or if I'm not happy with the video, I can go back. I never delete the raw files, but I do get rid of the JPEG images. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching this video. If this video has helped you, give me a thumbs up or leave me a comment or subscribe to my YouTube channel down here. And you can actually watch a lot more instructional videos that I've already got on my channel. There's already some that I show how I edit wildlife photos, how I select wildlife photos. All these are already on my YouTube channel. Until next time, it's Charles for Charles N Photography. Bye for now.